Have you ever waved goodbye to someone only to realize you might have just insulted them? Or given a thumbs up thinking you were being encouraging when actually, in some parts of the world, you just made an obscene gesture? Hand gestures are one of humanity's oldest forms of communication, predating spoken language by thousands of years. But here, yes, what most people don't realize. The same gesture can mean completely opposite things depending on where you are on the planet. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating evolution of hand gestures, how they travel across borders, and why understanding them might just save you from an embarrassing international incident. Welcome to The Curious Route, where we explore the hidden stories behind everyday human behavior. Before we dive in, think about this right now. As you're watching this video, you're probably using hand gestures without even realizing it. Maybe you're adjusting your phone, pointing at the screen, or making a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content. These small movements carry massive amounts of meaning, and throughout human history, they've shaped how we connect, communicate, and sometimes how we accidentally offend each other. Let's start at the very beginning. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans were using complex hand gestures at least 60,000 years ago, possibly even earlier. Cave paintings from around the world show handprints and hand symbols, suggesting our ancestors understood that hands could convey meaning beyond just physical work. But why did gestures develop before complex spoken language? Scientists believe it comes down to visibility and versatility. While sounds travel well in the dark or through obstacles, gestures allowed early humans to communicate silently during hunts, coordinate group activities from a distance, and express complex ideas when vocal cords were still evolving. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. As human populations spread across the globe, they took their gestures with them, but those gestures didn't stay the same. They evolved, adapted, and sometimes completely flipped their meanings. Think of gestures like living organisms constantly mutating as they move from culture to culture, generation to generation. Take the simple act of pointing, something we all do dozens of times a day. In most Western cultures, pointing with your index finger is completely normal, even expected when giving directions or identifying objects. But travel to parts of Asia and that same gesture becomes incredibly rude. In Malaysia and Indonesia, pointing with your index finger, especially at people, is considered aggressive and disrespectful. Instead, people use their thumb or their whole hand, palm up, to indicate direction. Why? The difference traces back to cultural values around directness and hierarchy. Cultures that emphasize collective harmony over individual assertion developed gentler pointing, methods that don't single out or confront others as directly. The thumbs-up gesture is another perfect example of how gestures travel and transform. Today, in most of the Western world, a thumbs up means approval, agreement, or that everything is okay. Drivers use it, social media platforms use it, astronauts have used it in space. But this wasn't always the case, and it certainly isn't universal. In ancient Rome, the thumbs-up gesture during gladiator fights actually meant something quite different than what Hollywood has taught us. Recent historical research suggests that Romans used the thumbs-up to signal death, not mercy. The gesture we associate with positivity was once a death sentence. Fast forward to modern times, and the thumbs-up carries very different meanings depending on your location. In parts of the Middle East, West Africa, and South America, a thumbs up is equivalent to the middle finger in Western culture. It's an offensive gesture suggesting a very specific insult. Imagine being a tourist, trying to tell your waiter that the food was great, and accidentally telling them something completely inappropriate. This happens more often than you'd think. So how do these gesture meanings spread and change? The answer lies in trade routes, migration, colonization, and in modern times, media and the internet. When the British Empire expanded across the globe, British gestures traveled with them, sometimes replacing local gestures, sometimes blending with them to create hybrid forms. The fifth for victory sign, popularized by Winston Churchill during World War II, spread through newsreels and photographs, becoming a symbol of resistance and triumph worldwide. But even this gesture has complications. Show the V sign with your palm facing inward in the UK, Australia, or New Zealand, and you've just made an extremely rude gesture, roughly equivalent to the middle finger. The OK sign, formed by connecting your thumb and index finger in a circle, demonstrates how quickly gesture meanings can shift in our interconnected world. For decades, it simply meant okay or perfect in most Western countries. American astronauts used it, scuba divers relied on it underwater, and it appeared in countless photographs as a symbol of approval. Then, in the late 2010s, something strange happened. The gesture was deliberately co-opted by certain groups and designated as a hate symbol in specific contexts. This created massive confusion. Was the gesture now always offensive? Did context matter? Different countries and communities had different answers. This brings us to a crucial point about how gestures travel in the digital age. Unlike the slow spread of gestures through physical migration and trade in previous centuries, today's gestures can go viral overnight. A gesture used by a celebrity, a politician, or in a popular meme can spread to millions of people across dozens of countries in hours. But here's the problem. The meaning doesn't always travel with the gesture. People adopt gestures without understanding their original context or cultural significance, leading to frequent misunderstandings and sometimes serious offense. Consider the gesture of tapping your temple with your index finger. In North America and parts of Europe, this typically means you're thinking or suggesting someone else should think. In some South American countries, particularly Argentina, the same gesture implies someone is crazy or stupid. The physical movement is identical, but the message is opposite. How did this happen? Scholars believe it's related to different cultural metaphors for the mind and intelligence. Some cultures associate the temple with wisdom and contemplation, while others associate repetitive tapping with mental instability. The evolution of greeting gestures tells another fascinating story. The handshake, now ubiquitous in business and formal settings worldwide, originated in ancient Greece as a symbol of peace, demonstrating that neither party was carrying weapons. It spread through the Roman Empire, fell out of favor during the medieval period when people feared disease transmission, then was revived during the Renaissance. Today it's considered the standard professional greeting in most of the world, but even here variations exist. The firm handshake valued in American business culture might be considered aggressive in some Asian cultures where a gentler grip shows respect. The pandemic of 2020 through 2022 forced yet another evolution in greeting gestures. With handshakes suddenly seen as dangerous, people around the world improvised new greetings. The elbow bump became popular, the foot tap emerged, and many cultures returned to their traditional non-contact greetings like the bow or the namaste. This demonstrates how quickly gesture culture can shift when circumstances change. Now, several years later, we're seeing a hybrid approach where people navigate between traditional handshakes and newer contactless greetings based on comfort level and context. Religious and spiritual gestures have perhaps the most complex travel patterns. The prayer hands gesture, palms pressed together, originated in Hindu and Buddhist traditions thousands of years ago. It spread through Asia along trade routes and religious pilgrimages, eventually reaching the West where Christian traditions adapted it. Today, it appears on emoji keyboards worldwide, often used simply to say thank you or please, completely divorced from its spiritual origins. This is linguistic evolution in action. The gesture has become so universal that many people using it have no idea they're participating in a tradition thousands of years old. The crossed fingers gesture for good luck has an interesting evolution that shows how gestures can retain their physical form while losing their original meaning. This gesture likely originated in early Christianity, where crossing fingers represented the Christian cross and was used to ask for divine protection. Over centuries, as Western societies became more secular, the religious significance faded, but the gesture remained as a general symbol of hope and luck. Some cultures never adopted this gesture at all, while others use entirely different gestures for the same purpose. In Turkey, for example, touching your thumb to your middle finger and snapping brings good luck. One of the most dramatic examples of gestures traveling and transforming is the Nazi salute. This gesture, adopted by the Nazi regime in the 1930s, was actually borrowed from ancient Rome and Italian fascism. After World War II, it became one of the most universally condemned gestures in human history. Illegal in many countries, yet its physical form, the raised arm, appears in completely innocent contexts in many cultures. Teachers raising hands to get attention, students answering questions, people waving hello from a distance. The same physical movement carries vastly different meanings depending on context, angle, and cultural setting. So what does all this mean for us today, living in an increasingly connected global society? First, it reminds us that communication is far more complex than we often assume. We can speak the same language and still completely misunderstand each other through gesture. Second, it shows us that culture is always evolving. The gestures your grandparents used might mean something completely different to your generation. And third, it demonstrates the importance of cultural awareness and curiosity. When traveling, working with international colleagues, or even just consuming media from different cultures, understanding gesture differences isn't just polite, it's essential. The future of hand gestures is particularly fascinating to consider. As virtual reality and augmented reality become more common, we're developing entirely new gesture languages for digital spaces. Gestures that make sense in three-dimensional virtual environments don't always correspond to traditional hand gestures. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence and gesture recognition technology are learning to interpret our movements, but they often struggle with cultural context. A gesture recognition system trained on Western gestures might completely misinterpret gestures from other cultures. Here's something to think about. Every time you use a hand gesture, you're participating in a communication system that's thousands of years old, yet constantly changing. You're part of the evolutionary process, potentially spreading gestures to new contexts, new meanings, new generations. The gestures you use today might be completely different from the ones your great-grandchildren use, just as yours differ from your great-grandparents. The evolution and travel of hand gestures teaches us something profound about human nature. We're always looking for ways to connect, to communicate, to be understood. We borrow from each other, adapt to each other, sometimes misunderstand each other, but we never stop trying to bridge the gaps between us. Gestures are like visual languages that cross linguistic borders, even as they carry their own complications and contradictions. So the next time you wave goodbye, give a thumbs up, or make the OK sign, remember, you're not just moving your hand. You're participating in human history, carrying forward traditions that stretch back thousands of years while simultaneously creating new meanings for future generations. You're part of how gestures travel, evolve, and shape human connection across cultures and centuries. What gestures do you use every day without thinking about them? Have you ever accidentally offended someone or been confused by a gesture in another culture? Drop a comment below and share your story. And if you found this journey through the hidden language of hand gestures as fascinating as we did, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next exploration. Here at The Curious Root, we're always uncovering the surprising stories behind everyday human behavior. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep your curiosity alive.